Welcome to the Healthy Workplace Nudge. As you can see here, an apple is greater than a donut. I want to ask you this, or imagine this. What is it like, or what would it be like to be able to bring your best self to work, and then at the end of the day, go home happier and healthier? Now for me, that is the promise of workplace wellness. But as we know, the industry in general has fallen far short. Over the last 50 years, we've seen the industry redefine success, recalibrate expectations, and to some degree continue to lower the bar so that now participation is the measure of success rather than outcomes. We've been stuck in this loop for a while, what I would call a downward trend, even in the face of a rising health crisis. But I think we had a reset in 2013 that I want to share with you, and an opportunity to reframe the conversation. And so what I'd like to do is take you on the journey that I went on with about 100 experts and corporate leaders to search for how can we get closer to the promise. And what I'm talking about is what kind of interventions can positively impact 100% of your employees so that they come home happier and healthier at the end of the day. Let's start out with a little bit of who's mind shift and what do we do. So the brief version is that mind shift started out as a process to deal with complexity, systems that were stuck. But then it became the name of my company. What we do is we tackle wicked problems, and wicked problems are defined as those that resist change. There are no easy solutions, and oftentimes when you introduce a solution, it turns into unintended consequences, and these are systems that remain stuck for decades. Can you think of a few wicked problems that we're dealing with in this country right now? As you can see, the body of work covers a wide range, and I'm often asked, so what's the connection between capital projects and education and workplace wellness and engagement and religion? They all have a common thread of dealing with human challenges of complexity in human-based systems. And that's what we do. So I'd like to start the story and the journey with Sherry Barkin. She is the Chief Director of Pediatrics for Childhood Obesity at Vanderbilt Children. And I met with her early into our research. And she shared with me, and she said, Rex, you guys face a similar problem that we face in healthcare. We deliver a lot of health care without ever achieving health. That impacted me. Think about that for a minute. There's a lot of stuff we do. Look at all the dollars spent on the programs. And are we actually sending more people home happier and healthier at the end of the day? That's my benchmark. That's the thing that drives me to ask these deeper questions. And I want you to note that at the root of all these questions are two things that we have to keep in mind. Are we addressing root cause? And are we dealing with human nature? Because unless we're dealing with root cause and human nature, then whatever programs we put in, we have to put lots of effort to get a marginal number of people to behave and participate. So that was what led our journey. I'd like to introduce you to one of the heroes in our narrative, and his name is Richard Thaler. How many have heard of Richard Thaler? He popularized behavioral economics. How many have heard of behavioral economics? This is where the idea of nudging comes from. He won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2017, and he's most known for shifting the behaviors on how we invest in 401ks with one little simple nudge. Opt in versus opt out. With that simple nudge, he improved the retirement of millions of Americans, and he increased the participation from 30% to 90%. He also flipped upside down the whole theory of traditional economics. Now, traditional economics and economics in general is the science of how we make risk-reward decisions and how you influence people to make better decisions. That's economics. The traditional mode is that we are rational beings. It starts with that premise. We are rational. And therefore, if we are rational, if we have the right information and the proper positive and negative incentives, it will influence our choices. But how many live with somebody or work with somebody who tends not to always be rational or tends to be a little irrational at times? So behavioral economics recognized the obvious in the 60s, that we are irrational beings. But here's the aha. We're predictably irrational. And with that predictability, we can design nudges. This gets into a little bit of brain science, and it's fascinating, and it's very practical, and it's highly effective in getting behavior change, which is one of the root challenges. Now, the problem with traditional wellness programs is that they're all built on traditional economic theory. If we give you the right information and give you the proper incentives, you will make the right choice. It doesn't work that way. 2013, the reset year. CBRE is a corporate real estate broker. And in 2013, their new headquarters became the very first WELL-certified corporate space. And I covered this change management story in a previous book. However, the whole wellness side was just a footnote. It wasn't the main attraction. What attracted me and our interest is that over the next 18 months, 14,000 visitors came to see an office of 250 people. They didn't come just to see a cool space, because we've all seen cool workplaces, but they wanted to know, how did this process and framework so powerfully transform your office and your company? They wanted to hear about that, and what they found with the WELL building standard is it gave them a framework to ask the question and work, how do we live and work healthier together? And it's the first time in history that building science and medical science came together to create a measurably healthier building. So we came to see why everybody is coming. Is this just lightning in a bottle? Is there something more significant? And the journey that it led us on changed all of our understanding and paradigms about effective wellness programs. We assembled a team, and my process brings lots of different stakeholders and diverse leaders together. We create what we consider to be some of the smartest adult playgrounds on the planet. And what we find is that when you bring people together, they have a common mission, and they play well together around serious topics, that amazing things come out. So we had 8 summits around the country over a 2-year period of time. What we came up with, and what you see here, is the very final summit. We call it our book barn raising summit. You got to come sometime. Everybody creates their version of the book. And we visited multiple companies, positive outliers in manufacturing, high-tech, education, healthcare, the gamut, to see what are you doing significantly, and began to connect the dots between them on what is consistently working for you. Halfway into this turned from research to a very personal project. And what I've discovered is that everybody has a story. And I didn't approach this at first. In the upper left is my mom, and we lost her because of medical neglect a year into the project. And then shortly after, I lost my youngest brother to medical error, tragic medical error. And then my mother-in-law I lost because of the challenge she had managing her diabetes, and she had an instant stroke, and it killed her, and she was just with us a month before and vibrant. And then the last piece hit us with my daughter on the far right. She was diagnosed with MS. So now I find myself not only researching, but very personal interest on this machine that we get sucked into that's dehumanizing and hard. And if me, with the resources I have and the capabilities, find myself ground down just trying to navigate this, what chance do most of us have? So it became very personal. Now, the research side, the first thing we did is we started with the Cleveland Clinic, and it was interesting to see the presentation this morning. I met with Dr. Roizen, who is the first chief wellness officer for a corporation in America, and he is the chief wellness officer in the Cleveland Clinic. My first meeting with him was so intense and so disturbing to me, I had to come back. And when I share with you the numbers, you will know why. The first question we had is that wellness is here to solve a problem. So let's figure out what's the problem. Dr. Roizen shared that in 1984 was the tipping point for our nation. That's when, after 100 years, that the average person per capita, we started taking on 400 more calories a day. It's about 1.5 pounds a year. But to compound that, in the 1990s, we became an exceedingly sedentary culture. Schools, workplace. Now, that's created a burning platform issue, and it's called chronic disease. 50% of the population has some form of chronic disease. And it's rising at a 7% compounded rate. So all the work we're trying to do to fix health care, that isn't root cause. What's driving it is chronic disease. 70% of our population is either overweight or obese. Now, I've been doing work in education, and 20% of freshmen entering college are either overweight or obese. But when they leave, 40% are. We've set them up for life failure in just 4 years. Here's the implication. Right now, we spend 18% of our GDP on health costs. How many of you are math experts in this room? Great at math, okay? You're wellness experts. I understand that. So you're not math experts, but I'll help you out. 7% compounded means that within the next 10 to 15 years, that 18% GDP will go to 36% GDP. The $12,500 that companies spend on average per employee for benefits will go to $25,000. Your taxes will double. So if you want to talk about economic impact and social disruption, that's the picture Dr. Roizen painted for me. And I left for the very first time in my life feeling like we have an existential crisis as a nation. Then we flipped over to say, so let's look at the solution, wellness. Soren Matkey, who's the author of the RAND report, I read the RAND report and I interviewed him, said, if the definition of wellness programs is that it improves the health and happiness of employees and lowers costs, they don't work. It's a definitive study, and we've got lots of studies that show that. And then when we went to the leading wellness expert at Johns Hopkins, they've got a great report on the 10 things you need to do to have an effective wellness program. And we buy into that because we did talk to companies that have very effective wellness programs. But when you look at it, I was at breakfast this morning with a person who said, boy, we're almost ready to go. It's just the CEO doesn't believe in wellness. That's one of the pieces. And in this program, you have to have all 10 pieces. Robust change management. You have to change the environment. All these things. So I asked the author of the report, I said, wow, who's capable of doing this? His exact words, very few companies are capable of doing this. And I pushed him further. I said, so give me an estimate. He said less than 5%. So then I asked the question, what do the rest of us do? And that became the center of our research, is figuring out what the 95% do. The other thing we looked at are the true cost of wellness programs. How many have seen the number that SHRM's put out and others? That it's about $700 per employee. How many have seen that number? We spoke to 2 Fortune 25 companies that do a lot of the research, and they said that doesn't take into consideration the soft cost of admin, loss of productivity, and false positives. When you add that up, it's somewhere between $2,500 to $5,000 per employee every single year. How many have heard the number that $1 of investment gets you $3 in return? That's the most popular meme quoted. There's no research on it. You can Google it and find 250,000 or more hits and articles from the Tribune to SHRM, but there's no original research. There's no source. The organization that's claimed to be the source, I actually went to the global head of health and safety, and they said, we have no idea where this came up with. But think of it intuitively. If every company got $3 in return for every dollar they spent on wellness, wouldn't they be doubling down? But they're not. They're cutting cost. So now we said, okay, we've got a burning platform and we've got a solution that doesn't work. Where do we go from here? Then we saw that, gee, we've got the cart before the horse, and we heard that this morning when we went to the Mayo Clinic and met with Dr. Ahmed Sood and had our summit there. He said it's stress is the real culprit. Stress is the killer. Because of stress, work is now the 5th leading cause of death. We've got the cart before the horse. It's the happiness that needs to come before the wellness. It doesn't matter how many steps you take, how you eat, or whether you meditate. If you're not a fit for your job and you have a bad relationship with your boss, it's killing you. Literally. The other thing that was a real aha for us, these behaviors that are blamed for 80% of our health costs. Again, remember, root cause, human nature. So what do you think the key behaviors are to cope with stress? Why do they call it comfort food? Root cause, human nature. Now, what really opened our eyes to this is the research being done on trauma, post-traumatic stress, and kids that experience trauma and secondary trauma. And what they find is that these behaviors are the body's solution to deal with stress and trauma. So all the programs you have to try to get at the behavior, unless it's getting at the root, chronic stress or some form of trauma that has never been worked through, you're fighting against what the body wants to do naturally. This blew our minds. Took us in a whole new direction. So the 95% solution. We use the domino nudge theory. And there's a great video on YouTube that I would recommend you see. The power of lining up the different interventions, but starting with the easiest one first, and then lining it up so that at the end you've got culture and you flip the leadership. The reason we didn't put leadership first is that's the hardest one to get and to keep consistent. Where you have good leadership, it's great. But too often what happens is you create a sandcastle. That when that leader goes or the economy dips, everything gets washed away and you're back to ground zero. So we wanted to create a solution that even if you're not in a position of leadership and authority, you could still transform your organization through lots of nudges. And we saw earlier today the power of these micro interventions. That's the same thing as a nudge. So let's talk about 3 of them. The first one are the nudges. These cost you nothing. Okay, this is a Google Micro Kitchen. Now notice the refrigerator. Notice the top half, the glass is clear. The bottom, it's frosted. When you're thirsty or hungry, unless you're really looking for the Snickers bar, you'll go and take something that's eye level, appealing, and clear. Your brain works that way. Now, if you really want the Coke, we're not dictatorial. It's down at the bottom, but you can see the bottom, these little fuzzy outlines of red and green and things like that. Fascinating. Google did a behavioral economics experiment with M&Ms, and you'll have to read the book to hear the rest of that. My favorite nudge is the company that put a full-scale mirror next to a vending machine. Love that nudge. So the second part is the environment, the physical environment. We spend 90% of our lives in some form of built environment. And up until 2013, we're now just beginning to understand how much the physical environment we are in impacts our cognition, the way we feel, our energy levels, the CO2 level in here. Those of you who are falling asleep right now, I'm going to blame it on the CO2 levels right now. The light that's in my eyes, that's going to affect how I sleep tonight because of my circadian optic nerve. This can have a tremendous negative or positive impact on us, and we're just beginning to learn how to do that. All these different systems of the body are affected by the environment. The chairs you're sitting on are hurting you right now. The third part, stress. We have the ability to design environments to reduce the level of stress in 3 key areas. The first is job design. If you look at the factors of stress, there's 2 axes. One is cognitive load, high or low. The other is autonomy, high autonomy or low autonomy. There's such thing as positive stress. What I do is positive stress. High cognitive load, but lots of discretion and creativity to do it. A call center person has high cognitive stress, but low autonomy, high burnout. So that's one area we can look at. The second are the friction points in the workplace. Things like technology working, being able to access files, privacy, the ability to focus and do focus work. All those things build up, and they create stress that builds up throughout the day and makes it hard to sleep. The second area that takes more work is the culture. Is it a safe culture? Can you bring your best self to work? And the shadow cultures, we need to learn and help our companies and our organization understand that all the good intentions of strategy confront what we call a shadow culture that doesn't want to change. And we have to help flush out what that shadow culture is and help change it. So here's the good news. Those 3 interventions cost less than providing a cup of coffee for your employees for a year. One-time cost. Affects 100% of people. No programs to try to get people to jump through hoops, show up at events. Positive health outcomes for 100% of your work population. And you're shifting behavior through nudges. And you're reducing stress by looking at job design and looking at making SharePoint easier to work with. For God's sake, right? I want to leave you with this, and you can email me and I'll send you these. I want you to go out and begin to do your own nudge audits. The first one is our physical nudges. So when you come to a meeting in the morning and they're serving pastry, coffee, and juice, that's a negative nudge. Do an inventory of the negative nudges and then have a conversation and get others involved and look at what can we do to replace that. The food that we get here is so well thought through, they're positive nudges. San Diego, positive nudge, right? You want to go outside. But also look at the stress points, the friction points as well, and that's the other nudge. I want to thank you. What I hope I've done is share our journey to give you a little context for how we got to where we are, give you a couple new ideas for solutions, and help us move closer to the promise. And if I did great, then I hope we can have a further conversation and go further and deeper into understanding some ways that you can go back and make a difference and change your culture. Thank you very much.